Hi, and welcome to episode 5 of Let's Make a Game. So, we've had 4 one-hour episodes so far. In those 4 hours, we built a prototype of this month's game, off and on again, including level editing and level loading and saving support. We've been keeping notes and ongoing task plans for the development as the issues have come up and as things have been completed. Our first 2 episodes went great, with planned tasks being finished under estimate, but the second 2 episodes, some problems caused tasks to slip past their sessions, including some work today that was sort of left over from yesterday. And that's okay. That is normal. Software development is difficult to plan for because you never plan properly for the unexpected, and we want to work that uncertainty into our plans. Today, we're going to start with some bugs left over from changes that were made in the last session. We have a new level selection scene, but need to add navigation to it from the title screen. We'll have a pretty complete flow for the player at that point, even in this early prototype, moving from title scene to level select to gameplay to end credits and back to the title scene, allowing a full cycle of gameplay. We'll also be fixing the ordering of buttons on that same level select screen. The buttons are not being discovered in the right order, and it's leading to a sort of scrambled level selection. And we're going to do that one first, because I think it's a fairly low-hanging fruit, and I also expect that all these 3 tasks that we currently have planned will be finished early, and we'll probably have time to squeeze in a bit more work for this session. So on to the first bug, the level selection ordering. We'll verify it first, make sure that it still behaves as we remember. And of course, Unity always takes a bit to wake up when it's been sitting unused all day and sitting in swap memory, so just bear with me for a second here. And unfortunately, after the wait, that was actually the wrong scene. We loaded the gameplay scene when we meant to load the level selection scene. We'll go back and load the correct one now. And again, trying to verify the ordering bug is still present as remembered before we begin fixing it. And there it is. Now, this happened because I expected that when I looped over all the children of the level selection panel, I'd get them in order, which would work for numbering them sequentially. But clearly that's not what's happened, and we're numbering them pretty randomly. We'll find a better way now to handle the numbering. I think, instead of walking over all the buttons already present in the scene, I've got a better way to approach it. What we'll do instead is populate the grid only at runtime so we can control both the numbering and the layout together. And the first step we'll need to make this happen is to give the grid, the level loader component that is, a reference to the button prefab so it can create these buttons itself. So we're going to go ahead and add that. And now we'll need to replace our iterate and number approach with a loop instantiating from this prefab for each of the 25 buttons and hooking them up properly. So we'll start with we'll start with running through the 25 buttons we need to create. And we'll create 25 instances and do that from the reference to the prefab that we'll hook up onto the level loader object. And now we'll move some of our labeling logic out of the old loop and into the new one. And we'll still be keeping track of these buttons, adding them to the same internal tracking list used in the original method. So we'll put that logic in place, mirroring what we're doing in the first version. Get rid of our old version completely, save our work, and let Unity reload that code while we come back over here and try this out. We'll need to clear out the old pre-runtime loading buttons that are built into the scene, now that we'll be populating them after the scene starts. And we'll also need to hook up a reference to the prefab for the selector to populate itself. Of course, that's the prefab reference we added in the code, and so we just hook that prefab up and clear out all of these previous buttons built into the scene. And at that point, I'm remembering that we forgot to make a simple connection for these created buttons to the grid itself. Though the grid object method created the buttons, no hierarchy will be implied by Unity, so if you have need of parentage for those objects, you're going to have to hook them up manually through the transform on each of them. We do that with parent.transform or child.transform.parent equals parent.transform. So the objects don't directly connect to each other, they only do that through the transforms. And now we really can try this out. Unity is reloading our code, and we will play the level select scene and see if the ordering is now correct. And if it is, which yes, it is, we'll also make sure that the buttons still operate properly. We'll take a look at the ones we've created here, and then we'll try one out and see if we can load a level from our fixed scene, and we can. So that's great. And we've now successfully navigated to a real level from our fixed selection screen. So we'll update our task list and notes now, keeping track of what we accomplished and what we ran into, and if any new work came up, which this just went smooth, and I don't think we have any new bugs or issues that have arisen from solving it, so that's good. And now we're going to work on fixing a regression that was caused by rework of the game manager. This happened because we took the game manager and made it a don't destroy on load object, which kind of necessitates it not being built into the saved scenes because it needs to exist in all the scenes, and if it both is saved in every scene and carries over through the transition between scenes, we'll end up with duplicates. But removing it from the saved scene meant we couldn't use it as a reference in button hookups anymore. So we're going to look at correcting that. After finishing our commit and task updates here. Let's see what this is doing right now, just so we can kind of verify the behavior. Which, as you can tell, is what I always try to do when approaching any bug, is just to make sure that everything I remember is correct. So right here you can see the don't destroy on load system within Unity that allows objects to exist between scenes, sort of outside the normal scene, and this is why our button, which currently is broken, needs that a reference to something, but we can't hook it up to something that doesn't exist in the non-play mode scene. So those buttons which use the game manager broke when we moved it out of the scene. We can see that missing reference right here. We don't really have anything else that we could hook it up to at the moment. And so instead, I think that we're going to give it its own component, or its own small script just for these buttons that need to load a different scene. So we are going to create a load scene button controller that will then be able to connect to the button itself and invoke a method on to load scenes. Okay, so we're going to take our newly created button script and move it in with the others. And it's be very simple one that we're going to move a little bit of functionality that was previously in the game manager over to this new button script. And given that these are invoked from the buttons, I think it makes more sense to be isolated rather than add too many things to the game manager itself, which can get a little clunky. In this case, we want to actually to load the third scene just because they're currently out of order. So the scene index 3 is where our level select exists, and that's where we want to go to after title screen. It's great. And we already know that that works. As a matter of fact, let's see if we can just go through an entire range here. Select our level, complete it, get up, and we are stopped at the quit, which gets us to our credit screen. So we'll go ahead and hook this up the same way as we did the previous scene. Hook the button up to itself to invoke the new scene load button load scene method. Go back to index 2, which is the credits, or that goes to 0, and is within the gameplay that we want a quit button that goes to that end, so that up as well. This is in total 3 buttons using this load scene button component. Alright. Let's get back to the title screen so we can try that walkthrough again. You can see here that we're actually fixing both these issues at the same time. The rework scene and the scene cycle tickets are both being worked simultaneously. So here we are walking through all the scenes. And back to the beginning. Right now, just to identify when the level is complete, we're checking this little box here. It doesn't actually help us to do that, except for to know that we're implementing the game complete check properly. But I think now that we have a level select, what we really want is to go back to that. And so that is exactly what we're going to do. So we know that happens right here. And currently it invokes a current level complete method on the game manager, which we're going to go and check out. Which finds that toggle and turns it on, but I think we're not going to be doing that anymore. And instead, we're going to go ahead and reload the level selection screen at index 3. And since we're not utilizing this checkbox anymore, we can get rid of it. Just a second here. We'll save our scene and try that out. So now when a level is completed, we should be navigated back to the level select where we'll be able to pick a different level. And that works beautifully. I think we do have a little bit of a hiccup that we want to try out. Let me just verify here. It doesn't seem like our level loading is including the doesn't seem like our level is including the special tile types, only the on-off flags. And it also looks like our editor buttons have been broken, probably by the same reasons that those navigation buttons were also broken. So we're going to take a look at that. So I think in the same way that we moved some behavior out of the game manager and into a new component for this, that these level editor specific functionalities don't need to exist in the game manager that's used for playtime as well. So instead we're going to create a new level editor class. We're going to move some of the functionality that was there, and once we've moved it, then we'll try to look into why those types aren't working. And we're going to make a note about that issue, and I think we can fix it in this session, so we're going to add another task onto this. As usual, we'll move all of our scripts into our scripts folder. And we will move back over to Visual Studio to open up that new component. We just find those right here. So clearly we only care about saving data and loading that. We'll definitely only care about saving data in the editor, but there might be a little more complication about how we move around the data loading facilities, just because those are something that we need in the actual gameplay, since that is used by the game itself. So let's move things one at a time, and we'll figure that part out when we get there in just a minute. We're going to try to see where this was invoked from, just as a refresher for where it's currently being used. And right now, it is itself being used in Game Manager in the new scene method. And the new scene method is just called when entering a scene for the first time and does some initialization. So let's get back to this and consider how we're going to make this all hook up the way we need. Now, we also had a reference to the text input in the level editor. We had that reference in the game manager along with the save. So we're going to move that. This necessitates a new import to get access to the Unity UI classes in the level editor component. And back in the Unity editor, we're going to do a little bit of wiring up of this new component, and especially the connection to the text input inside of it. And it does look like by moving that out, we've missed a couple references to it, so take a look at that. Doesn't look like this is actually invoked anymore, and is one of the references that we are having trouble with, so let's go ahead and get rid of that for the moment as we try to move things over to this new component. Wait for a recompile to make sure there aren't any other references to things we've moved around that may have now broken. And now we can wire up the input here. It looks like right here we can see the type is actually changing. But it does seem that the scripts are not updating, and I think we'll have to look into why that is happening. Okay. I'm going to take a look at this button now. Both of these actually. We're going to hook them both up to the level editor component. We can We know that we will definitely hook up the letters save here. Now, this particular aspect is needed by both the normal gameplay need to load level data, but also within the editor to do so. And the editor buttons, though, do need a way to get a reference to this a little easier. So we're going to have a same named method here that really is just going to be calling through. Ah, it's a little silly oversight on my part. There we go. And now we can hook up this load button as we've done our new save button, and then we'll look into why those type symbols don't seem to be loading right now. Why is the method not available to us? That's a little strange. So let's take a look at that. So the reason it's behaving the way it is only single parameter methods are compatible with the UI buttons, and so we need the single parameter version, which will pull the level editor number out of the input. And now, once the code recompiles, we should see the load level method available from the level editing component. Go. That's also hooked up to the grid. We'll save our scene before we play, just to make sure that we remember to do so. Alright. Now, here should be able to all of our level loading, and that does work. And it looks like we save as well. So now we want to find out why are the types not working? And easier than loading up a level that has the types, we can see that this is failing if we just watch any button, for example this top left button. Watch its type right here. Watch the type right here where we can see it toggle. You can see that we're changing it, but we're not changing the image right here, which should update to match that. So let's take a look into the code where the grid cell buttons are implemented, and in particular where they step through these and use this to set our type. Apologize for that. So when we change the type right here, we also change the type here, and we get that from the game manager. Now nothing is, we're getting no errors here, which makes this a little more strange. But I think I have a theory that we can verify by taking a look at the game manager prefab. So we have 4 empty sprites in the game manager prefab, and I think that what happened here is that when the game manager was part of the scene itself, we set the different sprites in here but never applied them back to the prefab. Now that the game manager always comes out of that prefab, we are missing them because we've removed our customized version of the game manager, which only in the gameplay scene had them hooked up. So clearly we just need to hook those back up, which I believe is blank row column square, and we're going to make sure that that all matches up and make sure that the control showing the current type of cell does match the sprite that's set for it. So once again, we're going to watch right here, and we should see row, column, square, normal. And just to make sure that everything is back to normal, you can see it's working fine. Alright, so I think we can call all of these complete. We can add to our notes now. And we definitely have some time left over. Alright, so I think we're going to use some of this extra time for something that I didn't remember to include in the task, but something that kind of needs to happen before a couple of these. So we do have a set of tasks for art assets, but before we can do that, we need some concept art, essentially. So, this is basically the need to not create the assets directly, but simply to make sure that the overall theme and feeling that we have is compatible with everything else. So what this means is just having sort of a consistent look and feel of the game, and before we start actually having some idea about what that's going to be. So I'm going to spend the next about 24 minutes that remain on the clock just to kind of sketch around, and this will maybe not be anything that gets saved. The whole point of this is just to give us something to work with. Alright. So our game is all of these buttons, and what we really want to do is figure out what those are going to look like. The simple clean square isn't bad, honestly, but I think I do want a little bit more of a sort of skeuomorphism look, something that does look a little bit like an actual push button. I'm kind of envisioning this as a kind of grid of rubber square buttons that are pressed with the light coming through. I think that the toggle is not going to be toggling them on and off back to these, but just as you interact with them. A nice little squish feel would be good. And of course, a little bit of not so much a texture, but just sort of a shape to them. I think would really help to draw home a good feel to the game. And right on these, let's go ahead and okay. Here we have a lighter and darker version that'll give us a little idea about how we might want this to work. Alright. So now I want to think a little bit about how some of the symbols might work. Right. I think that the really just sort of clean box shape of the symbols in the current placeholder graphics is actually something I might keep, which certainly communicates what they need to look like. An alternative, however, is that we can identify all of the lights involved in these shapes. So, for example, the symbol indicates the column rather than just be a sort of thick line. Might instead show the individual lights that are involved, and the same could be said for the sort of square shape, actually showing the individual, what is this, eight squares around the center that would be lit up, and that might make a more obvious connection directly to what they do. But at the same time, especially when you can always click the same button twice to see what it does and then undo that, the more abstract, simpler symbols like these really might work out for the best. And I think that's what we're more likely to stick with. Now, let's give some good ideas about what we want the buttons and the symbols to look like. I don't think that we really want these. I do think that these are good. Definitely happy about these. And still sort of need a vague idea about what the screen as a whole looks like. So these buttons, they kind of exist on their wider container, which is this sort of grid of lights. It's supposed to sort of look like a button panel, more or less. I did kind of have a vague idea in my head of a kind of some sort of 50s, 60s era little panel of old school computer buttons. Maybe this is some sort of device. Maybe we got a couple other little lights on it that might act as some kind of indication. Maybe there is maybe there's another part up here that's got a kind of readout for the level number, or maybe one for score and one for level number. I'm also thinking of adding a sort of countdown timer, sort of a golf kind of par for each level. So how many moves are you trying to get this done in? And so we can have a countdown of that as well, with like sort of old school, digital clock sort of readout. And that might be an interesting aesthetic to go for. It would be a little more art assets that need created between now and then. But I think that's definitely something to consider. This sort of thing. How this would tie into some of the other screens, though, because once you go and you have, something that looks very physical like this, it makes it a little more difficult to navigate to other screens and have those be something without everything needing to represent some sort of physical thing. So I think that this is an inspiration, but this is not what it's actually going to look like. And the reason that it needs to stay just that inspiration is that we want to get the feel of it without all of the implications that it makes that require additional work throughout all the scenes. So, want something that has that maintains that feel, but is still just a sort of flat user interface. And I think that sort of the way to do that is keep our panel, maybe keep these buttons. I do think that we can keep the buttons even in a flat face, but I'm not going to actually show this thing as a very solid object, but I do think the readout sort of works. Now, if we're going to have these raised buttons, that probably gives us a little bit of liberty to do the same thing with the different areas. So segment the screen with these sort of slightly raised non-perspective blocks like this. The kind of perspective where all you see is this one face right here and one wide face here. So I think this gives us pretty good direction, and I think it's definitely something that we can build on. I think this is also good for the height of them that we want. I think we want to keep them pretty light. This sort of bold outline isn't really, I think, what we want to go for. Right. I think this is a little bit what I'm going for. A little smoother in the final version, I think we're going to want, but I think these clean edges and then a sort of gradient surface is essentially what we're going to look for. I think this is also something that we can animate pretty easily by just sort of translate this down with a little bit of an offset that keeps it underneath the main panel, and that will take a little bit of work. So also, as we're doing this art, we need to think about how we're going to construct the sprites and what they're going to be made of. So while we have these two states right here that act a second, why is just see why this is not for some reason our navigation didn't, or our tool didn't change whenever it was selected. So there are these two states that we go between here, but that's actually not going to necessarily be two different sprites. I think what is more likely is we're going to have a single sprite for the button as it's raised, and we're going to have, of course, a sort of row of these, repeating the one. Not the scale, since these are all different. And then there's going to be, now imagine this actually lines up with all of them at the bottom, because what this is going to do is mean that, so actually visualize a lot better whenever I move one of these. So whenever it's pressed, that will just shift down, which will block this whole area right here underneath. And there will also be a background here, which will be exactly the same color or texture of this. So you won't see a difference between here and here, and this will just look like it's going down in a sort of cutout for the button on this device. And then we'll repeat this whole row for each 5. They won't the one row of buttons won't have any overlapping with the other ones, which keep our sprite ordering simple. And the only parts of this that really matter is that relative to each other, that these elements are all sorted like so to keep the buttons underneath the one in front and above the one behind. And that means a pretty small number of sprites that'll be needed to be created for this. And with a little bit, see, we have 9 minutes on the clock, and I think I'd like to continue this sort of sketching. Definitely have a pretty straightforward way of what I want this to look like in terms of the interface, but I still don't really have a good idea about the shell of it, and maybe that will come out with a little bit more work, but I haven't really gotten that yet. I do, however, know that we need a logo, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet, so I'm going to start sketching some ideas along that line as well. This is simple, but I might do the job without these lines. Sizing might go a little off here, but I think we can make this work. This makes a logo that is going to work out to be pretty essentially square. Need to think a little bit about coloring on these as well. I need to find some way of balancing these larger parts of the logo, the off and the on button, or words, sorry, with what are the sort of secondary words in the title. Aesthetically, these are going to be almost too small. It's going to sort of unbalance, especially with this sort of hanging out at the bottom. And maybe one way to get around that would be to put the and the again words on some kind of simple crossbars, essentially, with negative text. So whatever color these are, these will be in banners underneath them, sort of underlining the main words and providing a backdrop for these as well. All right. I think I definitely like how that could work out. Alright, so we've come up with a lot here. We found something we don't like, something we're drawing from, a little bit about how the art that we're vaguely sketching out aesthetics for would be composed, because we're going to make sure that we're coming up with themes that will be pretty easy to put together in the code itself. And we got some ideas about how the logo will be created, as well as a basic idea that we're going to go with the type of symbol art that we have now. We did find an alternative, but don't really like it too much. I think this is the closest to the final that we've got right now, but this definitely needs to be a little bit smoother, I think. And when it's put in place, I think we might have a better idea. It'll also be good to see what this might look like in terms of when it's actually loaded. So I do want to learn about that. And I do want to try one thing else. Which is just to sort of visualize a little bit. Not sure what happened there. Just want to visualize a very little bit, honestly, about what this would look like maybe when the art is lit up. So we're going to paint a little bit. Paint a little bit behind this. Thinking maybe we could do a sort of a yellow light, but I think this is a little too yellow. Yeah, this might be a little better. little more substantial, I think. And I think if that is the sort of on variant, that when turned off, they're going to be a little darker. What this was. Not quite. Let's say not quite that dark though. I think we neglected to do this in a new layer, so let's well, I think this gives us a pretty good idea there. Gives us a little more information to process about the overall looks, and I think that overall this is all really helpful stuff in figuring out what we want these things to look like. And so I'm going to take everything that was created here and add this to my off and on again notebook sketches. And that is a good way to wrap up this session with some brand new sketching art here, which we'll put right beside some of the original. So I hope you enjoyed some of the process today. I hope that it was a good mix of this, a little bit of code concern, a little bit of art concern, kind of trying to tie these things together. If you found that interesting, great, and if not, hopefully you'll find something exciting in the next episode, which will be coming along. I still have 20 more of these to do for the month of December based on my schedule. And add some notes here. So we're 1/5 of the way through the game. We have a playable version, and we have many of the editing pieces in place and a concept art for what we want this thing to look like, which means we need to start building some of those assets in the coming sessions. So I think it'll start to pick up a lot from here, and the look and feel is going to change drastically over the next 5 sessions. So look forward to it. I think it'll be great.